So it's my great pleasure to now introduce DrJack Pascoe, who's the Conservation and Research Manager at the Conservation Ecology Centre. So welcome, Jack, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Kim. No worries. I'm Jack Pascoe. I'm a Yuin man, and I currently work for an NGO called the Conservation Ecology Centre, which is based at Cape Otway. I've spent a lot of my life at Cape Otway, having grown up on the property next door to the Conservation Ecology Centre, so I've come a great distance. I studied in Apollo Bay at a little school, and then did a university degree at Deakin University before a PhD at the Western Sydney University on predator ecology in the Blue Mountains. I did a short stint after that, travelling around the subcontinent, where I did quite a lot of hiking, contracted Giardia, and lost 10 kilos in about a week. And that's basically where I come to you today after a short stint at Landcare and working for 8 years at the Conservation Ecology Centre. It's my role at the Conservation Ecology Centre to manage our conservation research program, which we've been building up for some time now. Our business model relies on ecotourism social ventures, which, as you can imagine, are doing extremely well in the current COVID climate, but I'm sure we'll be back bigger and better than ever into the future. So I wouldn't, and I'm coming to you today from Apollo Bay, and that's Gadabanud country. Gadabanud literally means speaking king parrot tongue. It's one of the areas within the Eastern Mar part of Victoria. And this mob basically runs, or the Gadabanud basically run from the ridge down to the coast, and particularly clans focused around Cape Otway. I wouldn't normally use slides for a presentation like this, but the alternative was just looking at my head for 7 minutes, so I thought I'd avoid that. Basically, we've been asked as a panel to talk about the role of science in building and supporting resilient communities in the environment. I've chosen to put that up on the slide simply because it'll keep me focused, but also I don't intend to answer it in 7 minutes, and as a non-social scientist, I don't think I probably could, given 40. But what I wanted to do was highlight a couple of incidents where science has contributed to resilience for one community this summer in particular, and another where science is contributing to an old story in a contemporary use for the betterment of communities and biodiversity. So the first scenario that I wanted to talk to you about really takes place in Mallacoota, which is an important area for me. Both my mother lives at Gypsy Point and was in the CFA shed when it tried to catch a light this year in those dark days, and my father lives on a farm up the Wallagarah, on country for him, and he was evacuated on New Year's Eve for the. And I guess what I wanted to do is very quickly highlight the important role that a collaboration between DELWP and scientists really brought a sort of a ray of a light to that community in a really dark time. So I'm referring to the project which rescued the bristlebirds from Howe Flat in an attempt to create an insurance population against what was looking like catastrophic events in that region. It was a time for that community that was really challenging. They felt like they were entirely out of control of the situation, and there was very few things that they could do to influence their circumstances. And speaking to my mother in particular, who spent a lot of time in Mallacoota since organising some of the recovery activities, it was that event that for a lot of this nature-loving community, or a section of the community that is nature-loving, and it's a large proportion of that community, it was a really important project for them because they felt like it was something that they could contribute to, that government and scientists were looking after the things that they held special and were special for that community. And I just wanted to highlight it because it was a strong collaboration between scientists and land managers that brought a ray of light to what was really dark times, and apologies for the cliches, but they were genuinely dark times for that community. And this was one instance where the role of science has directly contributed to the resilience of that community through a challenging time. The second story is a much longer yarn, and I'm not going to do it justice today, but it's my example of how science is going to help tell an old story reinvented in a new time, and contribute to biodiversity outputs and cultural and community benefits in the region. So for me, the genesis of this project, Remembering Our Future by the Eastern Maar, started with a yarn with John Clark on a hill which will remain nameless for this presentation because they're not my yarns and I don't want to give them away. But we were standing on a hill overlooking a considerable amount of Goolagin, Kirrawurrung and Jagadwarrung and looking across towards Gadabinoid country as well. And he was telling some yarns about what the different landscape features meant within that landscape. He pointed across and said that there is snake country and that is sea term country. And over there, that's bandicoot country. There's a whole lot of stories that relate to these different these different countries. And John explained to me that this was in fact the land management setting or template that the Eastern Maar were going to use moving forwards to manage their countries. They were going to map their landscape by the old dreaming stories, and they were in fact the template that they would be using. And John believed and still does that science is going to play a strong role in refining those management regimes and having great cultural, community and biodiversity outputs into the future. So what role can science play in something like this, which really is a cultural landscape mapping program, reimagined in an NRM management template, really? Well, we set about working with other collaborators like Michael Sean Fletcher, who's a researcher at University of Melbourne and a Wiradjuri man. For those of you who don't know Michael, he did some of the work, and you can see there's three things on this slide. One of them is a completely unrelated picture of a fire that I lit at Cape Otway. It was lovely, and I hope you appreciate the imagery. But on the left is a slide of some of Michael's work in Tasmania, showing that without Indigenous fire regimes, places like the button grass plains and the open eucalypt woodlands disappear, and there is encroachment of rainforest. So a reduction in land management by Indigenous people in Tasmania is actually reducing some of those productive cultural landscapes that the Aboriginal mob had relied on. To the right is one that Michael Sean Fletcher has done for us in the area of the Eastern Maar and still water in sediment, dragging up sediment cores from still water in those areas, showing that there's been a reduction in charcoal, representing fire regimes, and we had a complete change in the way the vegetation is arranged, a reduction in poas or grass species, far greater shrubby and weedy species. And that cultural landscape lens that John applied and was actually the script for land management in the area has changed, and with it we've changed the productivity values and potentially the habitat entirely. And that's the way we're going to use science to contribute to an old cultural land management story and move forward to try and get back to something like that into the future. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Jack. Really appreciate it, and a couple of really good stories in there that show that direct connection between community and science. Thanks for joining us today.